Currently, countless, mostly technical experiments are being applied to intensify storytelling.
Why continue making passive linear content when you can offer your audience so much more? Limitless choices, infinite possibilities.
But in practice, the attempts often fall short with bringing a new dimension to the emotional experience of it all. This will change when we can withdraw from the impulses of our direct surroundings and immerse ourselves in the world we choose.
Is that my hand?
Currently, it's still interactive stories that attract the most attention when it comes to innovation within storytelling, even when the result is often more gimmick than an essential addition. The Sochi 2014 series of the New York Times, for instance, is substantially not much more than a couple of text slides that connect the video parts.
From the front, racers can dictate pace and avoid crashes,
which in a way just makes it easier to produce since it doesn't have to be edited as one video. The story is still linear, and the bonus of controlling the scrolling doesn't make it more exciting. More interesting is snowfall, proving that a written article is a better foundation for interactivity. Creatively adding photo, video and other media elements to text might be the new standard. Emotionally, it doesn't trigger me differently by the experience to call it the future of journalism. Meanwhile, plenty of applications have emerged, capitalizing on the storytelling hype. Now everybody can tell their tales, stylized in similar fashion as snowfall, the modern variation of a slide projector disguised as a storytelling innovator.
For just $11.95 down.
These apps might make creating stories more accessible for a larger audience, but that doesn't necessarily make them better. Internet artist Jonathan Harris is also known for creating acclaimed storytelling tools. He combines algorithms with user data to create diverse libraries of human experience.
I don't know, I think I had this belief back then that data could tell you anything you would ever need to know about life. It was like, give me a laptop and an internet connection and I'll tell you anything you want to know about being a human being.
Original in its approach, but unfortunately not so much by the content it generates, which are mostly unstructured cliches.
I was doing all these projects that seemed like they would be giving me these really interesting insights about human nature and human relationships and love and emotions and things. But then I found that in my actual real life, I wasn't any wiser than I was before making these projects.
The most interesting story of them all is ironically from Harris himself.
I've actually been writing an essay about being stuck and how that feels and different points in my life when I've been stuck.
All written in a simple PDF that didn't need any interactivity to make its point. A good example as well why data and story links still aren't really working for me. Or it has to be something like Moneyball, where the story originates from how certain data is applied instead of pulling correlation out of context to create a narrative.
Jumping to an incorrect conclusion about causality when you see a correlation is the most often made logical mistake. I see at least one of these in the newspapers every week.
Video content based on data journalism usually isn't much more than a narrated version of an interactive map, instead of applied data as the best story source.
How can you get to a sense of empathy using technology? We live in this world of data. I'm very interested in how data can be used to drive a story. And if you look forward, personalization around story is going to become very valuable.
So if there was a way that we could confidently say, here's the data, and here, you can play with it all you want, but if you're not into that, here's a guided kind of interpretation of that we felt comfortable with, I think that would be great.
In that sense, guided interpretations like England from Above and Hans Rosling's Joy of Stats are actually quite traditional. They have an original look by ways of visualizing data, but leave out interactive opportunities and replace the choice to discover more with a curated one-dimensional narrative. What a catastrophe! Honestly, too much choice isn't something that most of us desire anyway. Our brain prefers the condensed version of a well-structured narrative above being a participator in what that story will be.
That was based on our research into having all data in one space and how our audience reacted to that. And the general perception was that there's too much information there. You've got about 4 or 5 seconds to capture the attention of the audience when they first come to your page.
That's why the structure of most interactive videos is still linear. The short history of the high-rise deliberately opens with the sentence,
"To watch the film, just lean back and relax."
To avoid scaring away new users with an overkill of options.
Adding options to people's lives can't help but increase the expectations people have about how good those options will be. And what that's going to produce is less satisfaction with results even when they're good results. The more options there are, the easier it is to regret anything at all that is disappointing about the option that you chose.
So by splitting it out into sections, you can help engage them a little bit more by only giving them small chunks of information at any one given time. So if they are even remotely interested in it, they'll capture the first part of the information, click on next, and then as they move through it, they can get a better understanding.
Other celebrated interactive projects like Alma, Clouds Over Cuba, Last Hijack and Punched Out knowingly apply the structure as well. So even though technology has empowered us to present video in a different way, the experience hasn't become emotionally more captivating by it. The only platform in which stories have seemed to be improving a lot lately is video games.
Writing a linear story for an audience to watch or read is one thing, but managing to write a story for your audience to participate in is another thing entirely.
That podium where gameplay usually got justified with story cliches is evolving so fast that quality and narrative can't be left behind.
The interactive medium has an untapped potential to touch the feelings of the player. You have that connectivity, the fact that I'm actually in the world and participating in what's happening on the screen in front of me. It gives us some sort of advantage to make you feel connected with what's actually happening.
New techniques like performance capture introduced with Avatar are currently also being used in game development. It allows actors to do movement and dialogue in one take, making characters a lot more realistic, so that layering static dialogue on top of pre-recorded animation just won't do anymore.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Actors can now play any character that's designed in the computer without going through hours and hours of makeup. And what we get is their performance coming through.
It was a very, very exciting time where we realized that we had rounded that corner and that we had true human emotion captured and performed by a non-human character.
They sent me here to learn your ways.
Having the actors perform as well as being recorded at the same time was imperative to get an accurate performance. Because every time you split up the performance in any way, you lose some of that magic where they did a gesture or they delivered the line a certain way. And those things have to be in sync, or there's just something subconscious that's like off-putting about the performance when you don't do it that way.
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
This increased standard of realism requires characters with more emotional depth and better written screenplays. Because when an alternate version of reality is getting closer and closer, we also become less forgiving of the details within that world. Thanks to the rise of indie game studios and crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter, the field of experimentation has expanded. Tools required to innovate are available to anyone these days.
With tools like Unity, GameMaker, Unreal on the high end, it's more like the barrier to entry is I have to have an awesome idea, I have to be willing to work super hard. The last couple of years, we've seen a lot of games explore narrative in like a really new and interesting way. So we've seen games like The Stanley Parable, Cart Life, a game called Papers, Please, Gone Home, where you don't fight anything, you don't kill anything, you're exploring an empty house in Portland and trying to figure out like what the hell happened.
Other games introducing narrative systems as the main gameplay element have also proven to be successful. New ways of storytelling that perhaps with time will be copied by larger, more commercial studios, conforming to our ever-expanding desire for interactivity, an element that's not a gimmick but a must to maximize video game potential. Only recently, large studios are discovering that it's not the Oscar-winning scenarist applying his 3-act structure that writes the best stories for games. Collaborations between writer and game designer have proven to be a more fruitful solution in compiling story and gameplay as a satisfying, coherent whole.
The knowledge that's required of how games are played and the limitations of the medium is actually really essential when you're writing for it. You need to understand how level design is put together, how mechanics can impact on the scene, how space can impact on the scene, and actually kind of embrace the craft of games writing and help improve it. Why? Because stories matter.
And while those borders are far from being discovered, the spectrum will only expand with the arrival of virtual reality.
Virtual reality lets you travel to places you've never been and see things you've never seen and do things you've never done without ever leaving the room.
Much like how we saw the transition from radio to film and all these different approaches, virtual reality provides a way to feel like you're there. There'll be a new and interesting way to tell stories.
Because how would you tell a story if the player decides where to look? This opens even more possibilities, such as players becoming author of their own virtual world, similar to Wade's quest in Ready Player One's Oasis.
Your book is about games within games. Not only does half the book take place in a game, but there are so many references to so many games. You clearly are a child of gaming culture.
Like if you just look at the advancement of video games in the last 10 years and how much more real they've gotten, and then I was just trying to imagine, what that's going to be like in 35 years, just trying to imagine the coolest possible platform for video games and communication and internet and everything kind of mashed together. So I would love for it to happen. It would be a lot of fun.
One game in particular where this idea of narrative might work could well be the soon-to-be-released No Man's Sky. This space exploration game, set in the largest virtual universe created till now, demands a different approach to narrative to adapt to its size. Because if the goal, as in most games, is sticking to the plot, what's the point in creating an entire universe? Unquestionably, the prospect of being in the middle of it all, instead of watching it on a screen, is very promising. Even if it's only in this universe, where it's technically already possible to log in live on a 360 camera, that one day will hopefully cover more imaginative ideas than just capturing sports, concerts and other popular events. It's clear though that every industry is exploring the possibilities of VR. Research shows that the mindfuck of VR works, that even when you're conscious of being in a virtual world, you still don't want to fall off that plank.
I'm sweating.
Yeah, that's hard to do.
Completely sweating. Whoa. All right, great job, great.
You know there's no hole in the floor,
crazy,
but your brain can't know, so it feels real.
You can feel empathy, you can feel like you're embodying a different person, a different character. People can have behavior change because of experiences that they have in virtual reality that are stronger than anything that's in any other medium.
Now we're at a stage where every discovery also introduces limitations, and there's still plenty that needs to be resolved.
Video games are not a mature technology as of yet. Even though they've been around, they don't have the same language as books, art, movies.
With endless possibilities on the horizon, there's the danger of having towering expectations too soon.
This world is so new right now. There are no rules written for the kind of things we're doing. So we're having to kind of forge those things from scratch and come up with new ways to solve problems.
VR already failed once when it was introduced in the 90s and technology didn't match the means of its vision.
I think I have to take this helmet off. I'm physically feeling the spacer for a second. Oh my God.
Virtual reality has never broken through because the technology wasn't ready. Virtual reality headsets were expensive and low quality, tracking was complex, non-affordable. That's all changing now.
Even now, the list of ingredients that need to be dealt with is still growing, so reaching the promise of an alternate existence could take a while longer. VR already worked as a seated experience, but the temptation to get out of the driver's seat is already there. The headset alone will not be enough. Other hardware will be crucial to feel completely engaged. Hardware that gives you the ability to move around freely and simulate movement of hands.
You unlatch the barrel, flick it over, release the clips, and you put in the new ones, flick it up, and then you shoot. Now if that isn't the friggin' coolest thing anyone's ever seen, I don't know what is.
Military is designing haptic gloves where you can grab an object inside the virtual space and then it stops your hand from closing and makes you feel like you're actually holding this virtual object that doesn't exist.
Filmmakers will need to rethink video using new cameras and compatible software. All technical tools based on a future vision for which there's hardly content that support it will surely work. But judging by many successfully funded campaigns in this field, consumers seem to have faith. Now we still have to wait on how these developments will influence the way stories are being told. Will the hybrid between scenarist and game designer be sufficient enough to become the storyteller of the future? Or do they need an even larger skill set? The human variation of a Swiss Army knife with extensive knowledge of all involved elements to create a coherent experience.
I've started to borrow from a number of different areas. Like I'm borrowing from design thinking, and I'm borrowing from programming and coding, and I'm borrowing from narrative design and storytelling, and from game mechanics.
Will it be the transmedia storytellers who are creating the foundation for this craft? Writers who disperse their story over multiple platforms that work separately from each other, as well as being a piece in the puzzle of a larger unified whole. Current projects exploring this terrain are interesting, but mostly too demanding to seduce my attention in this information overloaded age. But that's just the state we're in right now. The Middle Ages of translating all this technological development to narrative in unique ways that would be impossible as a novel.
It's not about perfection, right? It's about iterating. It's about putting it out there, seeing how people interact with it, being able to refine it and continue forward. And that's what I think is truly exciting about where we sit today.
That experimental stage that keeps on elevating stories to increased standards, paving the way for masterpieces of the new dimension. And just imagine when those stories might take place in creatively designed worlds, offering various choices of adventure in ways technology has allowed us. That could become a hard rock to be reckoned with, one that could inflame the desire to immigrate to a virtual world. And it will be the stories you can experience there that will make you decide if you want to stay or not.
Much of the adventure in the old stories is where they go into regions that no one's been in before. Well, we've now conquered the planet, so there are no empty spaces for the imagination to go forth and fight its own war. And that was the first thing I felt there. There's a whole new realm for the imagination to open out and live its forms.